My focus is, as you can see, is going to be about pitching the story specifically for local TV because, honestly, that's all I know. So, who I am, Garvin Thomas with NBC Bay Area. 25 years in TV, almost all of it in local TV. Just a quick glimpse of some of the places I've been way back. The Christian Science Monitor, when they did television, was where I started. I get a head nod for the Christian Science Monitor TV. It was a show called World Monitor. It's where I walked in there one day with no background at all in broadcasting or anything like that, and they took me in and taught me everything I know. And I've taken that and, like a lot of people in local TV in particular, moved around a lot. Minneapolis, Boston, it's fun, it's my hometown to be able to report there. Los Angeles, and then now, this is now 10 years for me in the Bay Area with NBC Bay Area. Started, when I came here, I was a reporter. So the traditional, if you've dealt with them, the reporter shows up with the photographer, and the photographer does the photography and the editing. Since I've been there, I transitioned, picked up some new skills, so now I'm not only the reporter, but I'm also the photographer and the editor for all the stories that I do. 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, can't tell you how fortunate I was that my bosses decided to finally listen to people who watch our station. And people always told them that you guys are nothing but negative. All you do is bad news. 25 minutes into the news, the broadcast, I'm ready to go out on the ledge. Often the bosses had given lip service to, yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to do more of those positive stories. And then you try and get into a positive story, and then there's, a brush fire in Roaring Hill, and forget that, go to the brush fire. So my bosses, to their eternal credit, a couple of years ago said, no, we're going to dedicate one guy, and that's all he's going to do. And we're not going to touch him. No matter how big the brush fire is, he doesn't get touched. And 2 years later, they have honored that commitment. And so we set up the franchise. It's called Bay Area Proud, and I'll get a little more into that in a moment. It's exactly what Bay Area Proud is. But in essence, it's just good news stories. I do 2 stories a week. They air Tuesdays and Thursdays in the 5 o'clock news. I've gone through many iterations trying to describe people exactly what I'm looking for. One of the latest, stories of success, inspiration, and kindness. So any of those stories, when I look back at the ones that I like and I like doing. As you see, what I'll do is, because what I do is different, the stories I tell are different, I wanted to break this up into the Bay Area Crowd section, and then I'm going to have a news section. I'm going to spend some time on the news section, which is all the other stories we do. All the other stories you see in the morning show, and the 5 o'clock, the 6 o'clock, and 11 o'clock news, that the rest of the news department covers. Has anyone here worked in a TV newsroom? Have many of you worked in a TV newsroom? Okay, that's good. I'm glad, because I'm going to get really basic, and for anybody who was in the newsroom, that would have been very repetitive and boring. The one thing I say, know what you have. I think a lot of people, there's a conception that all TV stories are the same. There's a TV story, and there's a newspaper story, or there's a web story. When in fact, the TV stories, when you get into it, there are different types of stories that are on TV. And what type of story you want done depends on what you have. And I'll go through right now about what kind of stories there are. The first one we call a reader. And if you're watching TV, that's the anchor talking with no video, nobody else talking, just them on camera. We hate those. Like we would rather cut off our left arm than put 2 readers in the show. That's reserved for, there's real breaking news that you have no pictures for, you don't even have a map for where it's happening, or a story that just for some reason has no possible video connection. As you'll learn, as I'm going to repeat over and over again, for us, video is everything. And so if it doesn't have video on it, we don't want it. The next, most simplest one is called a VO for voiceover. That's when you see the anchor talking, and then the anchor continues to talk when the video comes on. Because he or she is voicing over the video. This one, again, is the story that all there is a picture. There's no person who's going to talk or give an interview that adds any value. Often, this could be in a hard news situation, it could be a car crash, or a house fire. You know, where all you really do is describe, like, there was a crash, here it happened, here are some pictures of what had happened. The next level in TV is something called, we call it in shorthand VOSOT, which stands for voice over sound on tape. So it's the anchor talking, anchor continues to talk over the pictures, then anchor stops talking and somebody else on TV talks. Sound on tape means the sound you're hearing is coming from the videotape, back from days when we used videotape, but not anymore. So as you can see, each one gets a little more involved as far as what the story is. And then the last one is called a reporter package. And this is going to be the anchor talks, tosses to the reporter in the field, the reporter speaks, they stop speaking, and what plays generally in local TV is about a minute or 2 minutes. We call it a package, and that's what the reporter's been doing all day. And if you've dealt with reporters, you know, that's when the photographer and the reporter come to where you are, and they interview you, and they interview people, and they put it together, and a minute 20 is pre-prepared, and that is called a reporter package. And then this is, obviously, this is how we tell the biggest stories, the most important stories, the most complex stories, ones that can't be told with just a picture and just one interview. You're going to hear multiple voices, there are going to be multiple locations, those are going to be done like that. And one reason I'm telling you all this is when we get in our editorial meeting in the morning is you'll hear that tossed around a lot. People will pitch stories and it'll be, well, that's interesting, but that's just a VO. Or that's, you know, well, that's really good, well, that's a package. So we are always thinking in these terms of when people are pitching stories to us is what it's going to be. And, you know, generally, again, the more complex, the more compelling, the bigger the story is going to be that. Now, one thing I want to say is, now particularly for your organizations, if you are looking at either a reader, which again you really don't want to do, but if a VO or a VOSOT, that sometimes for nonprofits, if you have an event where you're raising money, that could be, you know, could be some sort of walkathon or road race, or you've got 500 volunteers to bag groceries, anything like that. Those pretty much are simple, straightforward. There's one idea. These are usually there's one concept, one idea, one thought behind these. You know, people are packaging groceries, or there was a walk to raise awareness for Alzheimer's. And those, because they're not really complex stories, those are going to be VOs and VOSOTs, and those are generally kind of event type things. That is normally when you go to your press release. And I'm going to guess a lot of you have done this so many times that I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but I want to hit some of the high points about press releases for TV and how they may differ than ones you would send out. And they probably should differ than the one you send out to a newspaper or a radio station. The first is the what. The headline of a press release for a TV station, the what should include what the pictures are. What are the visuals? So using my groceries example, you know, the headline is not Cisco helps Second Harvest Food Bank. The headline should be 500 Cisco employees bagging groceries for Second Harvest Food Bank. You want to hit them with what are you going to see, because that's what we want. The more you hit us with what you're going to see, that's more likely to do. We want action, we want good pictures. So put that right in the headline. A little on the when, obviously you're going to give me the hours. Keep in mind when the best visuals are. And an example I can think of is you're sponsoring a road race. And the road race, you know, people are going to be there, and you put on your press release, well, it's happening from 8 to 10. Don't leave it up to us, because we're going to look at our schedule and go, oh, great, we can get there somebody at 8 o'clock, and it'll be great. And the photographer gets there at 8 o'clock, and there's somebody unfolding a cartoon. Tell us, if the runners are crossing the finish line and hundreds of people are cheering and that's what you want, let us know that the best visuals are going to be at 9:30. Get exactly like, and then peg it to when the best pictures are, because you don't want to leave it up to us, because we'll just fit it into our schedule. The why, obviously, very important. You know, take it above just, you know, not just what it is, but, you know, give us a hint as to why we're doing it. In the food bag case, you know, why do we care? Because there are thousands of people in Silicon Valley who are relying on the food bank, or if it's the Alzheimer's walk, there are X number of people affected by Alzheimer's in this community. The where is obvious. The who, let them know that, going from that one about the VO, just the voiceover and the voiceover, let them know that there's somebody there who can talk, is ready to go on camera, and even gives a bullet point or two about this is what they can talk about. What kind of sound. And now you give them that, now we've moved up the chain, and the TV station is thinking, okay, this isn't just a VO, we can get sound here, this can be a VO stop, so it'll build up and be bigger. One detail I didn't put in here, but particularly if you're holding events on weekends, contact information, cell phone number for somebody who's at the event. I can't tell you how many times on a Saturday or Sunday I've gone out and I have the press release and I call and it's the person's work voicemail. And information, have the contact information for somebody who is on the ground. Because 9 times out of 10 with the DOs on both sides, you're going to get a photographer alone, the assignment desk, who's the ones who send out the assignments, are going to hand them a piece of paper and they're going to hit the road and they're going to call and they're going to want to know where to go and who to talk to. Who to send the press release to. Most news organizations, we call it the assignment desk. That is the spot in the news organization that is the clearinghouse for information. It's the one point where everything gets funneled, and then that is where decisions are made about what stories get covered. When we go to our editorial meetings, it's the assignment desk who brings the ideas, and they're the ones in charge of letting us know everything that's going on. And I put reporters as well. With a press release, you can spam the news organization. If you have any email you have, whatever the person does, send it. Even if they don't care, what they'll probably do is, or if it's not particularly for them, they'll probably just forward it on to the assignment desk anyway. And the assignment desk getting 4 emails about the same thing is not a problem. Email is probably best. Calling is okay. Normally what I would recommend is, again, if we're talking about a particular event, maybe a phone call, send out the email, a phone call perhaps a week in advance, and basically what you're asking is, are we on your calendar? And then a follow-up phone call the day of, not asking, if you're asking, will you cover the event, you'll always get the same answer, which is, we don't know. Maybe, it depends on the news of the day. But what you want to do is just call them a week in advance, and then the day of, whatever the event is you're promoting, and just make sure that you have us on the calendar. And that's a gentle reminder that, hey, we're out here, don't forget about it. Don't forget about us. Now I just wanted to talk about the more complex ones, which is when you have something that's not a single event, that is a story, something that's a little more complex, that involves deeper issues, event, how do I describe it? You work for, let's say you work for a nonprofit that helps the homeless, and you know that there's a study coming out about the number of homeless in Silicon Valley, and you think you have a great story to tell about, hey, here are the things we do. That's not a simple one question, one answer thing. This is where you guys would shine, telling your story about, here are all the things we do to address this problem. So that kind of complex story where you're talking about that is going to be a reporter package. What I want to say about pitching those stories is going to be different. I don't necessarily recommend a press release. I recommend personal contact with somebody at the TV station. It's not just, if you can send a press release to the assignment desk, but it's going to get folded into a whole bunch of others, and there's nobody advocating for you. And I'm going to say phone call, email, text, tweet, whatever, Facebook. You're not going to, it all depends on the person. Everybody prefers them differently, and you're not going to know. The question is, okay, well, who do I send it to then, if I'm not sending it to the assignment desk? And one of the things I got to say is, you're going to have to watch. You're going to have to watch, in order to pitch local news, you have to watch local news. And you have to watch and see who does what types of stories. Because ideally what you're going to do with a complex story, with an important story, is you're going to want to pitch it directly to a reporter. And the reason I say that is a little inside baseball on TV and how the newsroom works is, particularly in TV, you know, you're a reporter, you have a story every day. You're on TV every day. Every day you have to do a story. And you're so busy doing a story that you don't always have time to think up what tomorrow's story is going to be. And if you can come, if you're a reporter who can come to an editorial meeting with an idea, with a story idea that nobody else has, that is gold as a reporter. And so if you get your idea into the hands of a reporter, they're going to be your advocate. They're going to be your best advocate because they look good bringing to the editorial meeting a story that nobody else has. You know, and they may be the ones who say, hey, there's this survey that's coming out today on the number of homeless in Silicon Valley. I know a group that's, you know, working hard to reduce that number and all these things. And so a reporter is really going to be the best advocate for your story, and they're going to fight for you in a way that just a press release to the assignment desk isn't going to get anybody excited about, because not only is it a good story, but they look really good for having it. So that's kind of, if there's one insider tip for the day, it's find that reporter. Now, how do you know who to do it? Again, you got to watch. You know, we have reporters who cover different geographic areas in different times of day. If your story is in the East Bay in the evening, Cheryl Hurd is our reporter who covers that beat, and you want to get the story to her. You're not going to know that unless you watch. And then even the other added benefit to watching is you get to know Cheryl, you get to know the stories you do, and when you call her and say, hey Cheryl, I saw that story you did last week on this, it was really good, that's why I'm pitching you this story, flattery gets you everywhere. If she thinks you know who she is and what she does, you're gold. She will listen to you and she'll love you. I know, you know, as receiving, it means so much more. I can't tell you how many times more. If there is a pitch that comes to me from somebody who indicates in the first couple lines that they even know what I do. I would say 95% of the press releases that come to me are just spam, generic, you know, could be to anybody. I will pay them very little attention. But if in that first line you let me know that you have a clue who I am and a clue what I do, you got my attention. And so I can't stress that enough, that if you have really one of these important stories, find somebody to pitch it to particularly. Now you can pitch it to a person at every station. So you can find one at NBC Bay Area, at Cron 4, at KTVU. That's fine. That's fine. No, I'm not saying you have to give it to somebody exclusively. That's why we get to Bay Area crowd. Now this I want exclusive. This is different. So those were all the news stuff. This is what I do. As I told you, the segment is Bay Area Crowd. It's different than traditional news stories in a number of ways. First is the length. My stories are about twice as long as a traditional news story. I will say, obviously, doing stories about good people doing stuff, I have dealt with many nonprofits and stories, and I've heard countless times that the stories we've done have ended up in their marketing presentations and things like that. That is not our intention. Our intention is to do a good news story, but you know, getting these stories done for free is a good thing. As I said, I've changed a lot over what the best way to pitch it. This is what I've come down to now. All my favorite Bay Area crowd stories boil down into somebody did something nice for somebody else. And the keys there are the someone. Generally, when I get pitches that say, there's a group that, there's an organization that is not as exciting. But when you tell me about a person who does something, no matter how big or how small, that really goes well. So, and ultimately what I'm just looking for, are a good story. And a good story is simply something that any of you hear about during the day, and you go home for dinner with your significant other and you say, oh my God, I heard what this guy did today. I heard this thing today. And if you find yourself ever saying that, that's a good story, because that's what you come home and tell. And again, generally those aren't stories about institutions or organizations or groups. You usually come back home and talk about people and what they did. Bay Area Proud stories have a central character. The reason for that is any story benefits from character. TV stories, if you have a great character at the beginning of it, I have, again, twice as long as most people, I have to keep their attention for twice as long. And stories with interesting, you need people to do that. Because people want to see other people on TV. This is the exclusive thing. This is just to say the stories I like to tell, I don't want anybody else to tell. So in the press release thing, or when you're pitching a story, I recommend you send it everywhere. For the Bay Area crowd, usually I will ask for to be the only one. And in some cases, I've asked for people to call other TV stations back and say, sorry, we're not going to do it anymore. Selfishly. How are we doing? Okay, I don't want to take up too much time. That is where I want to stop now, because I want to make sure Jocelyn has plenty of time for hers. And I think, as we said, we're going to do some Q&A after that is all set.
Back among nonprofit colleagues, because I actually came from the nonprofit sector. I started out at Asian Americans for Community Involvement in San Jose, where I did grant writing and publicity for them for 5 years. And then I moved over to the United Way, as it was called then United Way of Santa Clara County. It was before Silicon Valley was hip, so we weren't United Way Silicon Valley yet. And that was great, and did some communications and marketing there. I've been at Palo Alto Weekly for 15 years, so I have an understanding of both sides of the fence, and I particularly know that there are a lot of challenges for you working in nonprofits to promote your organization and the work that you do while you're doing that very important work, that life-sustaining and nurturing work. So I'm hoping to give you some tips on how to approach newspapers that will sort of demystify how we operate, so it can be a lot easier for you. I'm curious, though, first, to find out how many of you are direct service providers, and then how many of you are actually in the administrative side. So, marketing, community development, and all that. So who here are direct service providers or managing service providers? Okay, good number. And how many of you are in marketing, communications, development, administration? All right. And one more question, if you don't mind. I'd like to know what your level of experience is. How many would say that you have a good working relationship with the media, or some comfort level in working with the media, as opposed to sort of little or no experience? So how many have experience, have had success? Okay. And then how many of you are just kind of getting from the ground up here? Okay, so we got to have half-half. I'm going to present some maybe strategic organizational tips, and then I think the question and answer period is going to be really helpful for those of you who maybe have had some experiences with the media and maybe didn't go like you thought, or you're a little bit baffled by how that all turned out. So great. Basically, working with newspapers, to be successful, you have to understand what a newspaper or a news organization is looking for. You have to know what you have to offer, which is, from my own experience, not always intuitive. And then try demystifying how and when to approach a newspaper. Pretty simple. I wanted to start out with a story, though, since we're all about stories. This is Jahan Turkis. She's from Egypt. She was in a bus accident in which she was holding on. I see a nod. Someone keeps up with the news. She was holding on to her 2.5-year-old daughter in the bus. The bus sped out of control, crashed. Tragically, her daughter was killed, and because she was holding on to her at the time, her arms were crushed, and she lost both arms from the elbow down. This was in 2012. Well, word about her came from Egypt to the Bay Area because of a family connection. And several organizations in the Bay Area, Stanford Medical Center, Palo Alto Subacute Rehabilitation Center, a prosthetics manufacturer, found out about her and donated or gave at very, very low cost their services. So she has been in the Palo Alto area for 3 weeks. She's getting the care and rehabilitation services that she needs. This is her other daughter, who's about 5. And Jahan basically just said that she wanted to have ability to brush her daughter's hair and to take care of her. And so that's the kind of story that newspapers are interested in. That's the kind of thing that you have access to. You have these people who are benefiting from your services, And someone at Palo Alto Subacute thought to themselves, yeah, this might be an inspiring story. We might be able to get a little leverage off of this. And when we heard about it, we were all over it. This is absolutely what our readers want to hear about. Inspiring stories, human interest stories, what people are going through. So here's another image of her. She's just, the reason why she doesn't have the sort of hand-like prosthetics is just because she's going back to Egypt, and there's some care and attention needs to be paid to sort of more advanced prosthetics. So she's got a basic mechanical arm and learning to use that really well. And she's an incredible person. If you meet her, she's bubbly, up tempo, very, very positive. So it's a good news story all around. I feel like I'm going backwards. There we go. So in addition to human interest stories like this one, we're also interested in hearing stories about clients who maybe typify what others are going through in the Bay Area. Say there's an uptick in evictions and you're a homeless provider. We're interested in interviewing people who have the experience that everyone else is going through. We want to know what people are faced with, challenges that we want to know from them firsthand, what their problems are, what their concerns are, what services they would like to receive. So anything having to do with a client is interesting. Statistics and data. You have statistics, you write grant proposals, you have annual reports, you survey your clients. That's also something that newspapers are interested in. You might notice that there's some reporters who handle data very well. If they get the report on homelessness in Santa Clara County, they take that information, maybe they break it out geographically, by age, by ethnic group. So any kind of information that you have like that is something that we are interested in. Another area is news about your programs. Are your programs changing? Are you launching a new program? We'd like to know about that. We want to know why a new program, say a breast cancer awareness program for Spanish speakers, why is that necessary now? We kind of want to hear from you from the ground up what the news is, what the trends are. And also, it's a little bit difficult for organizations, but it's bad news. We want to know if your programs are closing for some reason, why is that? What have you seen in the community that maybe makes that program less necessary right now, or what has happened in terms of funding? I can give you an example if you're interested later on about an organization that handled bad news really well. I think they came out of it looking pretty good, and they explained themselves fairly well. So the tip on this section is, much like Garvin said, you need to know your newspapers. There's the advice about don't bark up the wrong tree. Well, I like to turn that around. So bark up the right tree. Find the newspapers with the reporters who cover health, the ones who care about mental health issues, the ones who deal with teen issues, at-risk teens. In order to do that, you really need to know which newspapers cover your area geographically. That's the biggest point. If they cover Sunnyvale, they're probably just covering Sunnyvale. So if you're in Los Altos, don't even waste your time. Don't bother pitching to them. So geographically, you need to know that. And just, are there some organizations that feature human interest stories every other week on their front page? Maybe it's a Friday feature. Read your newspaper, whether it's print, online, on your mobile phone. And those types of things will really help you to figure out who you need to pitch to. Because I think that having a mismatch is often a difficulty that nonprofits face when they we've got a great story, we went to this newspaper, they weren't interested in it, we don't know why. Knowing exactly who your audience is really important. Okay. Now, when I was working for ACCI, we had, as most organizations do, the annual fundraising dinner. And a lot of my time was spent trying to figure out how to promote this fundraising dinner, how to get our speakers interviewed by the press. And this approach was fine, but what I wanted to emphasize to you was that the most valuable calling card that you have are the people in your organization, the clients that you have, and then also your service providers. Because as reporters, we want to talk to people who have information. They either have stories or they have expertise. And what I mean by expertise is, so the city of Palo Alto, for example, is contemplating banning sleeping in vehicles. So people don't have housing anymore, they can't afford rent, they're sleeping in their cars. The city of Palo Alto has been considered for quite a while now, actually, banning people from living in their cars. If you are a nonprofit that serves the homeless, you have people on your staff who know exactly like how many people sleep in their cars or what these people will face if they can't live there, if they have to be on the streets, or maybe they're going to drive to another community. Maybe you've heard, because you've networked with your colleagues, about other cities in which this has happened and what the nonprofit response was. So for a newspaper, we're really looking for experts to comment on what's going on. And if you're up on the news, you can identify opportunities for your organization and for your staff to offer expert comment on these areas. And that really means you need to know who's on your staff and who's able to talk about these issues, who the best spokespeople are. Another area of expertise that you have are really insights into the trends in the field. So you work with at-risk teens, and then this year you've seen an uptick in teens who really want to stand up against cyberbullying. Like you're seeing a great sentiment, and kids are getting active on social media. And that's the kind of thing that you see first. And that's the kind of thing that we find really, really valuable. We don't want to wait until the county has like done a survey, put a report, and it's like last year, we saw this uptick in this area where there was adults being addicted to a certain kind of drug, or teens taking a stand against cyberbullying. That is fine, but we really want to hear from you and what is going on with your clients. And I think because you see them every day or every week, and because you have meetings to talk about programs that you might want to develop in response to what you're seeing, that's the kind of information that newspapers are very interested in. We want to know what's happening on the ground, because that in fact is news. So you have all these things to offer, and I think that one area that you might think about organizationally is just, whether it's you or someone else, who has time every week to set aside time to either go over your caseload, figure out what kind of clients and stories that you have available, or you might want to set aside time and just talk to one of your direct service providers. Just talk to a counselor. What are you seeing? Whose stories are affecting you? What challenges are you facing? What's new? What's going on with you and your caseload? So those kinds of things are very important. And I do think that you need to be proactive in that. If you just think, well, okay, I get the concept, and at some point, there'll be a story that will come out, and we'll pitch it to the media then. I mean, I think you can do that, but if you really want to be active with the media, then I think you need to set aside time and make it a priority for yourself. Let's see. I was going to say one thing about that, though, because I know that this comes up. So the privacy issue. So I think probably a number of you are saying, well, okay, I'm not going to call up the media and tell them, Joe Blow lost the lease on his house and he's struggling. I mean, that's just a complete violation of privacy. And this is a big hurdle that organizations face. It's like, how do you bring someone who has come because they need help and they're vulnerable in some sense to the media's attention? Well, you have to do it. I mean, you have to do it gently. You have to know who the person is and whether or not they can be exposed, as it were, by sharing their story. And they need full disclosure, and I can't emphasize that enough. This is not about signing a consent form. It goes beyond that, because when you have a reporter sitting down with a client, everything that the client says is going to be quotable, unless they go off the record. And the news organization probably will want a photo, if not a video, of them. So there needs to be care and attention paid when you're approaching clients, obviously. But you are the ones who can do that. You're the ones who can identify the client and make sure that they're comfortable with what you're asking of them. That And the reporters will generally try to also make them feel comfortable, but they need to be prepped by you, and you are the embedded reporter in your organization. That's a role that no one else can fill. Okay, so how am I to approach a newspaper? Definitely with enough lead time. I can't tell you the number of times that we hear about events the day before. We have an event on Saturday, you tell us on Friday, but you've been planning this event for 2 months, so I mean, so we can't really shift staff that quickly unless it's a major to-do. So I would say give us at least a week in lead time, and any longer would be great. The situation with the Egyptian woman who came to town, even though she wasn't even in town, Palo Alto Weekly had contacted us to let us know. So that was probably at least 2.5 weeks ago. Yeah, and they knew she was coming. So just the fact that we knew that she was coming and that there was a timeline for her stay here is helpful. I mean, sometimes it's a chicken and egg. It's like, well, we need to be fully prepared in order to approach the media, and that's true. You need to have your clients lined up. You need to have your experts lined up. You can't have sort of like a half idea of like, well, you know, we see homelessness is on the rise in the homeless agency, and we think, you know, maybe you might want to talk to our expert here. We need to have everyone lined up and to know that we're going to come and ask a whole bunch of questions, and you're telling us, for example, that you had a program to address car camping back in the 90s. We're going to say, okay, when did the program start? How many people did you serve? What was the outcome of that program? I mean, that's the kind of data that you need to have in front of you when you contact us. But don't think that you need to wait till the last minute. I think that's my takeaway. Don't feel like there's a magical time. It has to be between 2 and 3 days. No, if you know ahead of time, just give us a heads up. At least for news work, because we schedule, especially for weekly, we schedule ahead of time pretty far. Press releases, press kits. I know that when I was going through my public relations classes, we made all these fancy press kits and, you know, all the nice paper, and everything was aligned and it was embedded by every single person in the organization. From the media side, we're much more interested in just access and then the information, the facts of what's happening. So the presentation, the look and feel of it is really not that important to us. I mean, I say we know what we're looking for as far as types of stories. And we know what kind of information from a reporting standpoint we need. So if it's stressing you out at all about how things look and how it needs to be presented, I'd say that's probably the lowest priority for news organizations, what it looks like. Just give us the facts, give them all correctly, and yeah, and keep it simple. We also like to be approached by email. That's generally the easiest way, because we get so much information every day pitched to us. We like press releases that are straightforward, simple. This is what's happening, or this is what the issue is. These are the experts I have, or the clients that I have that can speak to the issue. And then if you want, you can follow up with a phone call just to make sure we've got the press release. Sometimes we do get a lot of email, and things can get a little bit lost in the shuffle. But a quick phone call just to say, hey, I'm such and such organization, sent you a press release last week or 2 days ago. It's about this. I want to make sure you have it. And generally, it goes to the editor, or it does go to the reporter if you know that reporter specifically covers that topic, mental health news. Aside from news stories, we do have other avenues for you to participate in our newspaper. And I'm sorry, I should back up and say that Palo Alto Weekly is independently owned. We have 3 newspapers on the peninsula, one in Mountain View, one in Palo Alto, one in Menlo Park. But then there's also the Silicon Valley Newspaper Group, and they have the community newspapers in Sunnyvale, Los Gatos, Campbell. And we all kind of operate in similar manners. But for us, we have 4 additional opportunities for getting your word out, and guest opinion columns are one thing. So again, if an issue is coming up in front of the city, car camping, and you're the homeless organization, you have someone who can write about 1,000 words give us some context and perspective and make some recommendations about what the city should be doing about this, then you can contact the editor, me, and propose that you write a guest opinion column. We also have a calendar of events, master calendar of events for the area. This should be a no-brainer, whatever community you're in. If you have an event, get it to the newspapers, and they usually have some place, either in the paper or on the website, to list all the events that are happening. And with that, I mean, you just give the details of the events and contact info. We happen to have a photo gallery on our website, and that's just a place where community members can submit photos, whether of an artistic nature or breaking news or community events. So if you have a fundraiser and you took some pictures of kids playing on the new playground equipment that the Rotary Club installed for you, or anything else like that, we actually have a little venue where you can upload your photo and give a brief description of what happened. And discussion forums are an interesting semi-new development. Whenever people comment on a news story, on our website, there's a discussion thread that's started. So you can, if this is a topic pertinent to your nonprofit organization, I mean, you can just jump in there and start commenting and give your perspective, participate in the community discussion. And that's one of the things that we really appreciate and enjoy, is like, we want to be a newspaper that doesn't tell people what to think by any means. We want to present what's happening and have other people kind of comment, dialogue with each other, see what solutions can develop through conversation. So you can either jump in or you can start your own discussion thread on a topic that is relevant to your organization. Okay. I think that's it for me. And I'm happy to take any kind of questions.
Yeah, so we'll have both Garvin and Jocelyn take questions from you all now.
So with regard to press releases, got a lot of conflicting information about formats, PDFs versus Word documents, attachments, embedding it in an email. What's your preferred method?
Nothing that I would have to open. I want it in the email. So if I get a press release that has a Word document or a PDF, no. I want it, in my opinion, I'll say differently. I want to open it and see it. I often don't go to that second step unless the headline is so compelling that it's going to make me click. I won't point any fingers, but there is a I think it's a government organization, county organization, that sends out press releases in that manner. And the subject line is press release from blah, blah, blah. And then all the information is in a Word document. I don't ever open. So,
yep, I know that organization. So just have the information in your email, but go ahead and put a Word attachment as well. PDFs. To me, I was about to say, it kind of doesn't matter the format as long as I get the content delivered right off the bat. So in an email, attachments are good for photos or that type of thing. But if we're going to follow up with you, we're going to have some conversation and we can figure out the best format.
I just popped this up here because I realized I didn't give you a lot of contact information. NBCBayArea.com/Bay Area Crowd has all the stories that I've done. There are close to 200 stories there, so you can, if you want to go to that website to get, I didn't do a great job, I think, explaining exactly what types of stories I was looking for, but they're all there for your hours of enjoyment.
Hi, I'm Sarah in Southbridge. Thank you both. And I'm curious about lead time for a reporter package where there's a good chance of seeing a bunch of girls visiting one of our corporate partners and interviewing some role models that they work with. So is it a week or?
A week is probably good. She was asking for lead time, what kind of lead time for a reporter package. And again, I'm going to differentiate between what I do and what news does. News, often decisions, at least in my organization, for news coverage that day are made that morning. So, it's usually 9 o'clock in the morning, 9:30 in the morning, the editorial staff gets together, that's when they decide what the coverage is going to be that day. So you want to make sure your information is in the hands of that reporter that morning, so when they go to the editorial meeting and pitch their stories, that you know it can happen. For what I do is probably more along the lines of what you do in terms of the weekly. I personally have a story set up for late May. You know, I have the luxury of not being tied to a news deadline, so I'm always most important thing to me is when is the thing happening? When can I be there when the thing is happening? If the thing is happening in May, I'll wait till May to do it. And then also, and I think you touched on it as well, knowing the day's news and seeing opportunities to pitch what your organization does pegged to the news. I know, for example, some of the people who work for universities are very good at that because they have just a stable of experts on their staff with every different discipline. And I know some PR people for universities who will look at Ukraine, we'll send out an email in the morning. Here are all the experts we have that can speak to the Ukraine. Here are all the aviation experts we have that can speak to Malaysia. That they really are on top of the news and thinking, okay, because that's what's going to happen is the reporter's going to get the story that morning, and they're going to say, okay, you're covering the Ukraine today. Oh, who do I call? And if you have an email, if there's an email that says, hey, I got somebody, that's great.
Yeah, Stanford is terrific about that.
Other nonprofits, but one of the issues that we deal with working with kids, I mean, Audrey Potts is a good example of some of the situations that, sexting, suicide, really tough stuff for kids. It's not where I can pick someone out that's getting housing and say we want to interview because it's a really sensitive nature. What are some of the things that you guys suggest framing a story around so that we can still bring attention to the good work that we do without having to expose those kids to additional,
Yeah. So the question was about privacy. So she works with youth, and the idea of exposing youth to media attention can be very dicey and not desirable. One thing I didn't mention was that there are times, although this is not preferable, where we will not use people's names, or in photographing them, it'll be kind of a shadowy, like from behind the head type of thing. We do want their voice, we do want what they have to say. So we would try and encourage you to be able to bring someone forward.
But they would have protection to some extent so that the exposure wouldn't be as great.
Yes. And then the other thing is that sometimes, depending on your context, we've had reporters go into classrooms or groups and just say, hey, this is who I am, this is why I want to do this story. Just let the reporter introduce themselves, explain what the scenario is, and then ask for some volunteers. And there's no pressure in those situations.
We also have a parental part of that too, and
Yes.
permissions and the like of that. So that's something we have to be really sensitive to as well.
Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, given YouTube and everything else, is it totally acceptable to send you links to actual video content? And do you just take that from there and can use it, or do we still have to do some packaging for you?
No. So the question was, if you have video yourself,
Yes.
how do you make it available, and will I use it? Yes, if you have it on YouTube, send me the link. There's no harm in sending me the link to give me, if there's, rather than describing, this is what this event is going to look like, well, just show me the video of what the event looked like last year. 9 times out of 10, we want to shoot our own video. So you would do that, you would provide us with that link so that we would know what to expect vis-a-vis background, but unless it was something that you guys captured that we can't capture. If that's the case, then yes, we may use that. And we can access whether it's, then you would do it via Dropbox or something like that, or we can actually grab it off YouTube, that's fine. You don't need to go to we just don't use videotape anymore. So you don't have to put it on a videotape because we wouldn't know what to do with it.
So basically, we don't have to do anything special from an editing perspective. We can give you raw footage.
You can give us raw footage, and like I said,
and
it
you can
fits.
decide if it fits for you.
Yes.
I wanted just to add something about photos too for newspapers. There's some newspapers that, because of cutbacks, those from your organizations, but organizations that have staff photographers, and you can just check on the masthead whether or not they do, generally prefer to do their own photography. In that case, it'll just take a little bit more time, which is kind of the point that I want to make. That just because you submit a photo doesn't mean that we're not going to come back and ask you, can we take a photo now?
In terms of pitching, day and time, when I was in high tech, we stayed away from Mondays and Fridays. So is Tuesday morning a good time, or like any time during the middle of the week?
As far as what I was talking about, it depends. If you're pitching me, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. I mean, I am actually on TV Tuesdays and Thursdays at 5 o'clock
Right.
at around 5:15, so that's a bad time.
Right.
But you know, your initial contact with me is probably going to be either email or social or something like that. So any time is fine. If you are talking about daily news, stay away from, again, be aware when they're on TV, and stay away from those times. So I would not contact the assignment desk at 4:45 p.m. if they have a 5 p.m. newscast, because the assignment desk is going to be very busy during that period. So stay away from, if it's a daily news approach, stay away from the actual times when they're on TV, because they're extra busy.
For weekly newspapers, just be aware of when their publication date is and when they go to press. For example, we come out on Fridays and our press day is on Thursday. So sometime on Friday would be a great time if you want to catch our news cycle for the upcoming week. If you contact us on a Wednesday and we're going to press on Thursday, we may have everything already kind of locked up as far as the assignments we've been pursuing for that week. So just think ahead.
I had a question about, I'm Donna James from a mental health advocacy group called Young Minds, and you mentioned that you need to know your reporter. I know I could probably figure this out, but I'm going to ask you because it would be quicker. When you're looking for a reporter that covers mental health or a particular issue, what's the best way to find that? You said email is a good way to contact people, but how do you know which reporter is the best person?
Sure. I mean, if you were contacting or looking for that person from us, from our newspaper, you just go onto our website and type in mental health, for example. And for us, it's Sue Drummond, and she covers mental health issues. Sometimes there may be another reporter, but look through their archives of that paper.
Because if you put in mental health in your page's website and then solve stories, you might see 6 out of the 7 stories were all written by the same person.
Yeah. Great.
Yes.
I have kind of 2 questions. Do you guys have any tips on getting op-eds placed? And also, how do you feel about, there's always talk about nurturing relationships with reporters and reaching out for that coffee date and kind of getting to know each other. Does that work? Is that real?
I'll take op-eds.
Okay, so the questions are about getting op-eds placed and then also about nurturing a relationship with the staff of the news organization. So for us, for op-eds, just pitch the idea first and maybe a little bit of sample of your writing without going through the whole thing. Some community weeklies focus only on the issues pertinent to their geographical coverage area. So even if you have a great Santa Clara County-wide story or opinion piece, we're probably going to be able to just tell you fairly quickly without you investing a lot of time into writing that that's not our coverage area. Why don't you try Mercury News, or why don't you try San Jose?
As far as nurturing the relationship, I can't speak for print. Honestly, I don't have time for coffee. I wish I did, but that just, so generally the relationships that develop start with a story. And that if you and I work together and we really, you'll understand what I'm looking for. And that, yes, the next time you call, after we've worked together on the story, I'm going to be more inclined to listen, to talk with somebody. But those relationships are almost always developed through working on a story with somebody.
That is a really great point. We're not opposed to getting to know who you are. Time is limited, and if you just want to have one of those meetings where you say, okay, I want to find out what you do, who you are, I want you to know a little bit about us, we're open to that. But it doesn't have to be like schmoozy coffee, let's have lunch type of thing, because I think none of us have that kind of time. And it really is about the business. Here's a question way back there.
You said a good press kit can be done very simply, and I was just wondering if there's any organizations or events that you could recommend that we check out their press kit that's been done maybe low cost, but also professionally done. I'm looking for guidance.
Yeah, I think I would have to look that up. So he was asking about examples, templates for simple press kits. I think maybe I can get your email or look into that, because we get pinged with a lot of press releases, and a lot of them just have the basic information. And it depends on what type of thing you're trying to promote. If you have an event with speakers, you want speaker bios. On one sheet, you want event information, you may want a backgrounder. But again, it's not about the presentation, it's just about giving the information relevant to that entire event.
I mean, personally speaking, I get press kits, and 99% of the time they never get opened. If I end up, so even when I'm working with somebody doing a story and they hand me this wonderful press kit, it goes in my backpack. When the time comes that I'm looking for that information, I'll go to the website. You know, if I need to know, how did the CEO spell his or her name? How many people did they help? When was the organization founded? Or those are questions that I didn't get that day that invariably when I'm writing my story I need, I'll always go to the website to look for that.
Sorry, I have just two other questions. The first one is, let's say you are focused on an issue or cause that could potentially be pitched at two different angles and two different reporters, let's say arts, but then also education. So is it diplomatic to approach both reporters and allow them to fight it out, or are there some helpful hints or tips on how to navigate that?
Well, I say go to the editor and let them decide. No, you can pitch them simultaneously, but what you need to do is let them know.
Let them know each
that,
other
yeah.
kind of what angle you're pitching for.
Yeah, we've got this event. I think it could be a great education story. Here's that angle. We think it could be an art story. In our organization, there's not a lot of infighting, but we do want to know we're not pursuing the same thing at the same time.
And then the second question is, how are you open to infographics? That if an organization has invested time and energy in developing infographics, I know for print, maybe that's an option. I don't know if even for video, that's something that you're interested in using, or it's a useful
Yeah, the question's
media
about
tool?
providing infographics. We love infographics.
And for our
Absolutely.
web pages, we love them too.
You do?
Yeah,
Okay.
even if it never made it into the TV presentation when that story is repurposed for the website, yes, they love it.
Sometimes we will make our own infographic based on your infographic.
Okay.
But yeah, data in a visual presentation is really popular now.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Jocelyn, you said you had an example of an organization that handled bad news really well. I was wondering if you could expand on that.
Yeah, sure. So Abilities United is a developmental disabilities nonprofit up in Palo Alto. And for decades, they operated a warm water therapy pool, Betty Wright Swim Center. That pool last year came to the end of its life. They were trying to repair it. They realized they couldn't do that safely and sanitarily. And then so all of a sudden, they decided to close it. And that affected a great number of clients. It was a beloved pool, if you could imagine that. And the way that they handled it was that they realized that this is a situation that they needed to take immediately to the media. I think there was a couple of days when they were trying to decide what to do. But, so they came out with a press release. They contacted us directly. We got phone calls about it. And then they held a community meeting. We announced it first, and then they held a community meeting for discussion because there was some upset in the community. They wanted to recognize that and address that. And they invited us to that as well, made sure that everyone knew what was going on. So transparency is huge when you have bad news. And you can come out looking like you're a responsible organization and that you're forward-thinking as well. I think they handled that tremendously.
If we had, do we have a few more minutes or?
Yeah, just a few more questions, being respectful of your time and everything.
Because one thing that I just wanted to, if you guys were up for it, one way in which our presentations, I think, were the same, we're talking about how to identify stories within your organization. That generally, this is our organization and this is what we do, doesn't get our attention, doesn't get news coverage. That you need to find the story within. Now, the story within your organization might not tell the entire story of your organization, but it'll hit upon your brain. And, that is really what you want to think about more than, this isn't a story about everything we do, but this is a great little slice of what we do. It's not going to contain the grand spectrum, but it'll get your name out there, and it'll get out there, but the way you get out there, and what I was going to say is I did have one story. I didn't want to take up too much time with any video, but I did have one story that I thought kind of kind of told that it was an example of an organization that the story isn't about what they do, but they identify the story within their group, within their people, and I think it worked well for them.
5,000 Boy Scouts on the peninsula have risen to Eagle Scout. That's the highest achievement in scouting.
And each one of them has George Maher to thank for it, even in just a small way. But it's George's own Eagle Scout award that is at the heart of tonight's Bay Area Proud. NBC Bay Area's Garvin joins us now with his story.
Janelle, for those 20 years, George Maher has volunteered for the Scouts advancement team, double-checking applications, filing away awards. Now, because of that, perhaps no one better knows what it takes to be an Eagle Scout than George. Well, that and the fact he completed all the requirements himself more than 60 years ago, which is why what happened this weekend is so special, and tonight's Bay Area Proud.
Spend enough time around enough Boy Scouts, like they do at the Pacific Skyline Council headquarters in Foster City, and they say you can always spot the Eagles. It's not the pin on the chest or the patch on the sleeve, though. It's something special on the inside. It's something anyone who's ever known George Maher says is inside him. It's why when Mark Manchester started work here last year and met George, he didn't even ask George if he were an Eagle Scout.
I didn't ask if, I just said, George, what year did you get your Eagle Scout?
And I said, it should have been March 10th, 1944.
Should have, because George never officially was an Eagle Scout. He had all the merit badges, sure, but in the middle of his board of review hearing, the very last step needed before becoming an Eagle Scout, George's mother interrupted the meeting.
She told me my father was not doing well, and she was heading to the hospital. And I didn't say anything, I just grabbed my stuff, and I said, we're going.
George's father died later that day, and within a matter of weeks, George was in the South Pacific fighting the Japanese,
a violent typhoon,
and the weather. It was during one typhoon in particular that George was tossed about the deck so violently he lost his wallet containing his life card, the only written proof of his Boy Scout accomplishments. George returned to the States, got married, raised a family, and did write one letter to the Boy Scouts asking about his award.
And the letter that I wrote was returned to me, addressee unknown. That's it. I'm out of luck.
And that was that. Until that day last year when George told Mark his story. This time, Mark sent some letters off himself. These were returned with a very different message.
It was the letter saying that I am an Eagle Scout, and they gave me the date of March 10th, 1944. And there wasn't a dry eye in the place.
George had always told himself the Eagle Scout thing didn't bother him too much, but perhaps down deep, it really did.
On my honor, I will do my best.
On my honor, I will do my best. Which is why this past Sunday meant so much. 68 years, 9 months, and 7 days late, George Maher got his pin, his patch, got what he had earned. Ultimately, what's in your chest matters so much more than what's on it. In George Maher's case, though, those two finally match.
Nothing could make that story better, right?
I want the story to keep going.
I know. Get that receipt again, man.
Thank you. But I thought, it wasn't a story about what the Boy Scouts do, but it was the people who worked in that organization saw something that happened. What makes it fantastic for me was they told me before that ceremony, so I was able to be there. They get, talking about lead time, that story was made by me having, it wouldn't have been half the story if they told me a week after it happened, because I wouldn't have had pictures of it, that it hit on all the, on all the touch points of, it was someone, Mark Manchester, did something nice for somebody else, George Maher, and there was great video of it, it was a story, and it was, again, great PR for Boy Scouts. I mean, they love it, they need it. All know they need it. But at its heart, it was just a good story, a fun story to tell. And so those are the types of things we talk about, identifying stuff within the organization that's not necessarily the mission, but does touch on the brand. and we love to tell. And even better, if they come back to me with a different story, I can do it. If I do just the overarching story about the brand or about the mission I can't do that story next year because I've already done it. But if you give me an individual story and the next one is an individual that's going to be different, you're going to get me twice, and I'm going to be able to do it twice.
Great insight, absolutely.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier social media. Talk a little bit about how that works in terms of pitching stories.
I try to be active on social media. Honestly, email's the best. Social media is a great way to interact with people after the story airs. So I'll put my stories on, and it's a great way for me to get exposure so people know who I am. But when push comes to shove, the email is going to be, better than posting on my Facebook page or tweeting. It's just how the business is done. So social media is a way to reach me. You can, but I put, on the NBC Bay Area Proud website, I plaster on my Twitter, on my Facebook, my email is everywhere, and that's probably the best way to reach somebody.
I would say the same thing for newspapers. Email is the best way. It's just the most direct. Sometimes when people post news on Twitter, we have people who are sort of scanning Twitter all day long, and that's great. But you just announced it to X thousands of people, and if you want just more immediate attention from us, then it's best just to contact us directly.
You have a question?
Yes, I did. So if we take the Boy Scout story as a successful pitch and as a successful story that went through, when did they contact you exactly? Who contacted you, and how long was the email that they sent you? How did they pitch it?
It was not an email, it was a phone call. It was probably about a month before the event, the ceremony. It was probably about a month before the ceremony, and it was somebody who wasn't even an official PR capacity, but I think it was a board member. It was a board member who I knew from previous, not even pitching a Boy Scout story, just somebody I had a relationship with already, called and said, and then it was just a phone call, and then it was just 2 sentences really, is all I needed. There's, an 85-year-old man who's going to get his Eagle Scout pin, and they're going to have a ceremony. And it just, he didn't have to say much. So how much do you put? It's hard to say. You really want to, you really want to put the grabber up top, because I'm not going to read too far down to get, if you get me at the top, it's kind of funny. It's like what you probably tell your reporters. It's like if you don't grab them in the first paragraph, they're not going to read 4 paragraphs down. So it's kind of like writing that. So
it's the Jerry Maguire principle. You had me at hello.
Sometimes it's 3 words, and I'm in.
Well, I wanted to ask because you had mentioned you prefer to have everything in one email, but I think the way we usually do press releases, they're 1 page long, and that in an email starts looking really pathetic, right?
Not to me.
No?
I mean, if I don't know it's a page long unless I've gone down and read to the bottom, and if I'm reading at the bottom, you got it. Really, but I mean, you want to be concerned with what's above the fold. When they open the email, I want to be able to see, at least in a couple lines, what it's about.
We talked about press releases, but are you comfortable with just developing kind of like a 2-paragraph pitch? I mean, where again, it's more just the who, what, when, where, here's what we have to offer in terms versus a full-blown 2-pager press release?
Yeah, we're absolutely comfortable with that.
No matter how you do it, just get the important stuff in the top. Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys.